It is hard to believe that we are in February already, but that just means we have another month of new comics. But before we get into those new comics, let's finish out the month of January. It's time for another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC, Batman, Wonder Woman, Marvel, Spider-Man, Image, Spawn, Saga, Boom, Once and Future, Power Rangers, or whatever book or publisher you follow. We cover them all here. This is the place for you. That's right, it's for everyone. This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. Let's get it.
Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I am your host, Theo. Back again, got another great episode. So we're now in the month of February. I am excited to see time is just moving closer and closer to my 50th birthday. But in January, we had 5 Wednesdays. So we know in that whenever there's a fifth Wednesday of comics, it's usually a light number of books that come out. But what it did this week, this past week, as I looked at these comics that did come out, it allowed me to look at some comics that I may not have picked up during my normal push and pull of books. And due to that, we have a new publisher that's entering the top three for my favorite books from this past week. But before we get into that, I am going to play back an interview that I had with Christopher Ford. He is the writer of Dark Pink. It is a comic that is actually going on right now through a Kickstarter campaign. I got wind of it following one of my Facebook groups online and was waiting for it to come live. And once it did, I backed it, reached out to Chris and asked him if he can come on the show to talk a little bit more about it, his inspiration behind it, and to hopefully give him a push to make sure that that comic gets across the finish line over on Kickstarter. The thing that really grabbed me, of course, I am a native of New Orleans, and the comic is set in New Orleans, and it's set in the 80s, and I'm a child of the 80s, so two reasons for me to just go ahead and grab it and support it online. And I'm hoping as the campaign comes to an end at the end of February, that it gets across the finish line and it reaches at least one of its stretch goals. So we're going to talk to Chris about that. Now, unfortunately, when I set up the interview, for some reason, I messed up the settings. And so the video didn't record, but I did get the audio. So I'll play that. I'll show some of the art that was provided to me from Chris, and the link to the campaign on Kickstarter will be in the show notes. So if you can, please back it. I like what I'm seeing thus far. This like a very interesting campaign, and so take a look at it. But here it is, my interview with Christopher Ford talking about Dark Pink Comics. And when we get back, we'll get into my top three as well as the honorable mentions. But again, enjoy the interview. I'll see you on the other side. Hey, it's Theo. I am sitting here with Christopher R. Ford, writer of Dark Pink. Christopher, welcome to the Comic Bin Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Thank you so much. I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
So, first thing, when I saw this post on Facebook about the campaign coming up, and the first thing that really caught my attention, and it catches my attention every time I see it, is that this comic is set in New Orleans, which of course is my hometown. So we'll ask a little bit about that as we get into our conversation. But tell folks a little bit about yourself, who you are. You're a published author, so tell us a little bit about what you have out there already.
My name is Christopher R. Ford. I am a writer, and I have published three children's books. They are Playing Catch with Dad, Shooting Hoops with Dad, and Kicking It with Dad. It's a children's book series about a young kid, who's basically the young kid version of me, and his relationship with his father and life lessons through sports, which is basically kind of like a semi autobiographical story of me. And I just wanted to kind of put something out there to show like the bonds of like Black fathers and sons, get some positive imagery out there, and also, kind of tell a little bit of like kind of my story and how I was as a young kid growing up. I've always been a creative person. Always had a million stories in my head. I used to live in my own head when I was younger. And like writing has been like that kind of outlet to kind of get those stories out for me because I can't draw. So writing is kind of it's my passion. It's something that means a lot to me. And yeah, the natural progression as a comic book fan was eventually to move over into like kind of creating my own comic books. I've actually had this idea in my head for almost 20 years now, actually. So I'm excited to like get this close to it. I have, the experience of writing some books and now just taking that next step.
Okay. So let's just go and jump right into the campaign. That is Dark Pink. Again, it is on Kickstarter. The link will be in the show notes so that you can go ahead and support it. How did this story come about? And me being the New Orleans native, how was New Orleans established as your place to base this comic?
Well, basically, I'm from Houston, and my dad is from Louisiana, and so we would go to Louisiana. We go to New Orleans all the time. I've been to New Orleans dozens of times in my life. So it's a city that's near and dear to my heart. And I wanted to set a story that was in a different place. A lot of comic book stories, you look at like the Marvel universe, like everything is pretty much set in New York or like a made up version of New York. The kind of East Coast metropolitan areas. And I wanted just to do something different, something that I could relate to, and something like a lot of people, like especially like comic book fans of color, could relate to, like a different city with a different type of vibe, a different culture to it. And if you're doing a story about supernatural elements and stuff, you can't really beat New Orleans as like a kind of a home base for all things kind of supernatural and cool. Because I wanted to kind of mix the vibes of like Black culture, especially in the 80s, because it's set in the 80s. Um, Mix that with comic books. And yeah, if you're going to do that, then New Orleans is probably your only choice as a setting.
Yeah, I remember when Marvel first started publishing Strange Academy, I said they finally got it right by setting it up in New Orleans.
Yeah.
The best place to put it. So Dog Pink introduces us to Dara Pinkington. Who is she and why is she the person for this title?
She is. I like to describe her as a mix of Misty Knight from Marvel Comics because she was a huge influence. She's one of my favorite comic book characters, criminally underrated. But a mix of Misty Knight, a mix of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a mix of Whitley Gilbert from a different world. So she has like a kind of a lot of like different things, and also like a mix of Moni Love, the rapper, from the 80s and 90s, because she has a British background and she's a hip hop head. So, she's just a very, very interesting person to me. Like she kind of is like a lead character you don't really see in comic books too often, because also she's very young and she's not a hero yet. Like we start this journey, she's like literally on her first case. She's starting to be a private detective, and she doesn't know what she's doing sometimes. So she has a lot of relatability to her. She wants to grow into being like a Misty Knight who's just like an expert on top of things all the time. But we're starting like at ground zero, and she's a person like she's funny, but she's also can get down when it's time to get down. And she's just someone that I think people can relate to and will want to follow, like her journey from being uh, a young, kind of naive person to like a person that can really be a beacon like in the community. Because like one of the main plot points in this city, or in the story why I said it in New Orleans, is that all of these weird things are happening in New Orleans, in kind of the more urban communities. So people aren't like the authorities aren't really caring, and so someone has to kind of come and be like, well, I care and I want to help. And she is that person. But she doesn't know what she's doing. So she kind of has to grow and learn and evolve into like an actual hero instead of a person that's just like, oh, well, someone's coming to me asking for help. I'll do the best that I can.
Now, if you can expound a little bit more on your fascination and your love of Misty Knight, because she has a lot in common, including the fact that she has a robotic arm. So how much influence does Misty play in your development of the character Dara?
Yeah, I walked into my local comic book shop in like 2006, just to pick up some stuffs, a couple of issues like that I had on reserve, and I saw the cover for Daughters of the Dragon #2, and I at that point I had never even heard of Misty Knight, like I didn't know like anything about her, but the cover looked so cool. It was just like it was like blew my mind because it was Misty and Colleen is wearing like basically an Adidas sweatsuit, and she's like in a b-boy stance, and Misty's behind her with her fist out, and it just looked like a Run DMC's cover or something. And I'd never seen like that from like a Marvel or a DC cover in my life, and I just bought it. I was like, I don't know who these people are. I don't know what's going to be on the inside of this, but this looks too good to pass up. And so I bought it on the spot. I read it. I went back to the store to get the issue #1, and then followed the issue to its completion. And it just struck a chord with me. It like made me feel like seen as a comic book fan that also likes hip hop. And I don't know, it hit me, and I was like, okay, I would like to do something cool like this one day, and I would love to make a character that is cool as Misty. And so, but back at that time, like I said, I can't draw, so I didn't really. It just kind of set with me, and I was like, well, it'll just be something in the back of my head forever. I eventually wrote a television pilot because I was like, I would have a better chance of maybe turning this into a TV show than an actual comic book. Because I didn't have any connections. I didn't know like the process of actually creating a comic book, especially back in that time. But as time has progressed, technology has progressed, social media has progressed, you can actually create comic books now. Like that was something that, unless you knew somebody in 2010 or even 2015 or 2016, you couldn't really do that. But now you can find artists, you can self-publish, you can find everything, all the tools you need to create a comic book are at your feet now. And so now was finally the time. And like the coolest part about all of this is the artist that did that cover of Daughters of Dragon #2, Kari Evans. I found him, and he did one of our covers, and he's directing the interior art for the project. So it was kind of like a crazy full circle moment for me to get the person that influenced me to do this to actually come aboard and work on this project with me.
So let's talk a little bit more about the creative team. So you have Corey Turnbull on interiors, and you also have another cover artist from Robin Smith. How do you connect with these guys to come in on the project?
Just track them down through like social media, and just kind of reaching out to people like Karan Grant. is also another cover artist. He did the Prince inspired cover. Um, he got he connected me with Koi. And then Robin, I just reached out to. Like I found like her art. Like I did an article about her like maybe 6 or 7 months before I reached out to her. And then so yeah, I had her kind of contact information. So I was able to reach out to her and she agreed to do a cover. And so yeah, we have like just this really amazing, talented team of artists. Like Robin is literally an award-winning artist. She's won awards for her art. Karan is and Koi have been working for done stuff for Marvel for years. And Kari is the person that got me to this point, creatively. So it's kind of like my own like personal dream team of like this really, really amazing artists that all have like varied styles, but are all like feeling like the kind of the idea because each cover is kind of a recreation of something um like in pop culture, like we have a Purple Rain inspired cover, we have a Malcolm X inspired cover, we have a Sade inspired cover, and Koi's promotional artwork is a take on Vampire in Brooklyn. So that's another thing that's going to be a large part of the project is like all these kind of cool black pop culture references from like the 80s and the 90s. We're going to just slyly sneak them into like every as many scenes in the comic as I can.
Yeah, and I'm steady looking at the comics, the covers on the campaign page, and I wanted to ask you, what was your inspiration on setting this comic in the 80s and the 90s and doing it from that aspect instead of a more modern day comic set in the 2000s? Was there any specific reason as to why you wanted it set back then? Is it just because of the influence of those decades on you growing up?
Yeah, it's I'm a 80s baby, so it definitely is something that brings back a lot of like really nostalgic, very core memories for me. But I also wanted to set it in the 80s because back in the 80s and the 90s, there wasn't a lot of like black superhero representation in comic books. A lot of the like legacy characters were created like in the 60s and 70s, and there weren't too many actually new characters created in the 80s and 90s. So when I was growing up and I'm reading comics at that time, I didn't get to see a lot of characters that looked like me. You would have all of the characters would be kind of guest appearing in other characters, like larger stories. So I wanted to set it in the 80s as kind of like, hey, if we were in the 80s when this came out and you could go to the store and you could kind of see this, I think that that would be a kind of a cool thing. And, especially since now there's like such a great boom in like the black indie comic scene. Um, a lot of stuff, you can see a lot of stuff that's created featuring characters that are in a modern setting. So we have, luckily, we have a lot of that now. So I wanted to just kind of throw it back to like a different time and, put a unique twist on like black comic book characters, like if this was like 1987.
Gotcha. Yeah. I too am a child of the 80s, so I definitely know what you're talking about. I remember speaking to Dennis Cowan once and just remember telling them how grateful I was when in the 90s Milestone came about, because before then, like you were saying, if a Black Panther or a Black Lightning popped up, it was in a bigger scene, it was an event going on in DC or an event going on at Marvel. So there was nothing really going on until those guys came around with Milestone. So I definitely feel where you're going with the idea of, establishing a character at that point in time compared to modern day. Because again, as you were saying, there are a lot of indie comics out there today that is more modern day. So I appreciate that. Um, let's talk about some of the other characters in Dark Pink. Are there any did you have any inspiration for those characters as Dara had that inspiration from Misty Knight?
Yeah. Definitely a lot of like definite inspiration from the time. Like her. her intern in the series is a young man named Trey, who is heavily inspired by Dwayne Wayne from The Different World. So he's kind of like a mix of Dwayne Wayne, but also like Q, like from the James Bond series. So he's kind of like the tech guy, but he's also wearing starter jackets and wearing Jordan ones and being like a lot flyer than Q would be. So he is like a major supporting character, and so yeah, his influence was very heavily set. Like I want to kind of have a like I love A Different World, by the way. So kind of like a Dwayne Whitley type of thing. With two of the lead characters, because those are two characters that I just grew up with and loved and wanted to kind of represent in my own kind of different way. So you have him, you have Frank, the bartender, who is kind of like the guy that has like the inside scoop on everything, kind of the word on the street guy.
Mhm.
He's a bartender, so people tell him stuff. He's kind of like a little bit of like a cooler like Ted Danson from Cheers. So we have him, and then we have the mystic psychic that also like kind of works like next door to Dara. And she's based on an actual like a real person who was believed to be like a witch, like back in the 30s and 40s in New Orleans. They were she kind of like played it up a little bit because it made her like one, people were scared of her, and two, you kind of let her kind of do her own thing. So we have a character who's basically who is her. So she's going to have kind of an interesting past to where why is she in the 1980s, but people might have seen her in the 20s and she looks exactly the same. So so yeah, I think we have a pretty interesting cast of characters. Like the main antagonist um, is also kind of inspired by Eddie Murphy's character in Vampire in Brooklyn. So he's kind of like a smooth talking vampire who is gonna kind of match wits with Dara, and we kind of see like what kind of relationship, adversarial, maybe something else between them, as kind of things get like a little complicated, as things go along. So
So Dara is kind of on multi missions, in your universe. Like as you mentioned before, she's looking to help people and grow her skills as a detective. But one of the reasons why she really wants to be a detective is because she wants to know what happened to her parents. What's going on there?
yeah, so she is originally from the UK. That's where she grew up with her parents. They moved to America, which the kind of potentially have the like explain a little bit of the backstory. If we were able to reach like our stretch goal, we'll be able to like include like a little like 8 to 10 page backstory on how she got kicked out of boarding school, and then they come to America. So she's here. She graduates from college here, and her parents go to New Orleans on a trip, and then they just disappear. So she follows up, comes to New Orleans to try and figure out what happens. And she doesn't she doesn't know what she's doing. So she's like, well, I will try to become a detective. One, I need some money. Two, I need to figure out how to do this. So that's kind of the overarching mystery, is like what happened to her parents. And then in the meantime, we'll have her like solving cases. Like people will start to come to her as like when something weird is going on in the neighborhood. Um, she's the only person that's willing to actually help. So, we'll kind of have like your every issue kind of have like a monster of the week type of case. And then also, she's going to be trying to figure out what happened to her parents.
So let's get into the campaign. It is live on Kickstarter right now. It is live through the end of February. I think it's the 23rd. And so, full disclosure, I've been emailing Chris back and forth, not just for this interview, but because I wanted to back the campaign. Because again, New Orleans is home for me. So anytime I see something that's based here or that references New Orleans, I'm picking it up and I'm supporting it. But let's talk about the campaign. What can those back in the campaign expect to get? Whether stretch goals, we already mentioned the variant covers that are out there. What else can they expect in the campaign?
Yeah, we have a lot of really cool stuff, and people are responding like really well to the campaign. So far, we have $27,500 raised, which is incredible, amazing. I was so worried. I'd worked so hard to kind of launch it, but I had no idea what was going to happen. But like the response has been great, and I am so humbled and thankful to everybody that's supported it so far. Yeah, like we have the choice of three different covers. You can get all three covers. You can get autographed copies. You can get art prints. We have t-shirts. I have one of them on. We have two different t-shirts that you can choose from. We have the opportunity to have a cameo and get your face drawn as a background character in a scene, and we also have the opportunity to become an actual recurring character in the universe, which is also gone pretty well. I was like maybe two or three people, maybe my brother will sign up and do that, and a couple of my friends will. We actually had like 20 people sign up to that, which is like mind blowing to me. So we're gonna have a lot of people, like a lot of supporters, that are actually gonna get to be in the comic, and yeah, it's just been like such a great response. I'm like so ecstatic and happy that people are feeling like the character and the universe that we're trying to create, and we're going to deliver something amazing to everybody that supports it.
So, before we close things out, if you can, as a indie creator, as a Black indie creator, explain for folks the importance of having a platform such as Kickstarter to show your work, because it's not easy getting your work out there, especially if you don't have the right connections. So explain how difficult it is to be a Black independent creator, and why it's important for platforms such as Kickstarter and Indiegogo for those things to be out there for creators like you.
I think it's hugely important. Like I wouldn't be able to do this like without those platforms, because it's a very expensive endeavor. Like if you can't draw like me, creating a comic book is very expensive. It's literally like hundreds of dollars a page for art. So it's just a vehicle that allows you to raise the money and also raise the awareness. It kind of kills two birds with one stone and allows you to get your message out there, kind of give people like a sense of what you're trying to create, and then have them help you raise the money so you can actually get it created. And yeah, like I that's what I've been waiting for. That's why I was sitting on the idea, for 15 years, is because like I didn't have a way to get it done. Like I didn't have, you know, 15, $20,000 just sitting around to, pay like a top level artist to, you know, make a 35-page comic book, and also, I didn't have the reach to get hundreds of people to back the project. So yeah, it's one of the greatest things that has come from like the evolution in being a creative, is the ability to actually reach out to people now through crowdfunding to help get your creativity out there to the world. It's Yeah, like I said, I wouldn't have been able to do it if Kickstarter or Indiegogo didn't exist. Like it would still just be a idea like rattling in the back of my head. And so, yeah, I would encourage anyone that has an idea, has a creative project, to look into it. Like you can get it done now. Like you can create whatever it is that you have like in your head that you wanted to get out for however long. Like you have the opportunity to do it. Just you know, have a little bit of money to invest in some promotion of the Kickstarter to kind of get it rolling. Um, and then after that, like you can pretty much accomplish anything.
The title is Dog Paint. Again, I will have the link in the show notes. Make sure you back it. I backed it first day. I'm very excited to get my hands on it once
I
the finished
appreciate it.
product is available. As always, before we close out, we got to get into some rapid fire. All right, here we go. Two choices. There are no wrong answers. Just pick whatever. All right,
Okay.
let me know when you're ready.
All right. Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. Black Panther or Black Lightning?
Black Panther.
All right. Goku or Naruto?
Oh man, Naruto.
All right. Power Rangers or Voltron?
Voltron.
Thundercats or Silverhawks?
Thundercats.
All right. Last but not least, Batman the Animated Series or Justice League Unlimited?
Batman animated series. Gotta
All
go.
right, Batman the Animated Series is catching up, man. Justice League Unlimited was getting ready to roll out there, but the last few interviews, animated series started making a comeback. Christopher R. Ford, title again, Dog Pink. It's live on Kickstarter through February 23rd. Thank you so much for joining me on the Comic Ben Comic Book Podcast. Good luck with the rest of the campaign. I'll be waiting for my stuff, and I hope to see you soon one day, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the support and the opportunity.
So again, I want to thank Christopher R. Ford for joining me to talk about Dog Pink. I will have the link in the show notes so that you can go on out to Kickstarter and back the campaign. It ends February 23rd. Make sure you go out there and give it some support. I'm really impressed with what the art looks like thus far. I think it'll be a really good series. I'll be supporting it for as long as it's out there, being that it celebrates my hometown. But again, thanks to Chris. Apologize for the issue with the video being messed up. It was completely my fault in putting the meeting settings together, and I totally messed that up. But again, thanks to Chris. Best of luck. Again, get out there, support it, help it reach those stretch goals so we can get some other stories added to the actual series so that we can learn more about the characters within the book. But with that being said, let's go and jump right into my top three for the past week. Again, it being a fifth Wednesday, we had a light schedule of releases, but I was still able to read comics. And in the number three spot, we're going over to Dark Horse Comics. You Never Heard of Me, number two, written by Yolanda Zanfardino with art from Alicia Ramboli. Absolutely love this story. I haven't read anything by Yolanda since Alice in Leatherland, which was done over at Black Mass. And this duo did that series as well, and I absolutely loved it. But what You Never Heard of Me looks at is it focuses on Will. Will is a young teen starting high school, and it's a brand new high school. His family travels a lot, and they travel simply because his grandmother has the ability of foresight and is able to basically touch a person and see their best and worst moments, whether it be in the past or the future. And they travel because people know of his grandmother and of her ability. And they travel just to stay away from the notoriety of what she does. Well, this gift has typically passed down the generations. She got it from her father, I believe. That's the story in issue one. It's supposed to go to his dad. And yet, when she passes, the gift doesn't go to his dad. It comes to him. And it was something he was not prepared for. It was something he doesn't want. And yet he has this gift now. And so in issue 2, he goes out and, he works to try to basically hide himself from everyone else simply to avoid getting into physical contact with anyone. And yet that fails. It fails primarily with Allie, a friend, well, not a friend at this point, but someone who run past him, touches him, and he sees that she's not going to make it. She's going to die based on the actions that she's getting ready to take. And so he goes and he stops her. He basically tells her of his gift. And he saves her life, really. And he's able to change the course of her history by stopping her from going to this event. And I want to spoil it, but it would have been quite tragic. But from there, Allie kind of takes him on a course that he does not want to go on. Again, he doesn't want to be a hero. He really wants to avoid getting in contact with people, and yet she does the opposite of that, and they really do become close friends. And it's just it's a really great coming of age story for the character of Will. And not just Will, but some of the other characters in there as well, including Allie, who has gone through some trauma already in her life. But great story. I am loving what they are doing there, not only with the writing, but also with the art. Again, I loved both when they were on Alice in Leatherland at Black Mask. And this is just a great story as well. I think that you should be picking it up and reading if you're not already. Again, it's just a great story that just looks at life of a kid who doesn't want to be a hero, and yet, in many ways, like Peter Parker when he was bitten by a spider, you know comes to comes to terms with what has been gifted to him by his grandmother upon her passing. But great story. I'm hoping to get both of them on the cast one day to talk about it. I'm going to reach out to them to see their availability, which going to be kind of tough considering Yolanda is in Italy and I'm here in the States, but I've done it before and I don't mind doing it again, making that schedule work so that we can get together. But that is my number 3 book for the week. You Never Heard of Me, number 2, from Orlando Sanfordino and Elisa Ramboli over at Dark Horse Comics. Now, in the number 2 spot, we move on over to DC Comics and DC Power and Rise of the Power Company, number 1. So we know that DC typically does their DC Power series throughout the year for certain reasons. This is, of course, to kick off Black History Month. And the Power Company was a team that we have not seen around in a while. And so with the events of Absolute Power, we see that Josiah Power, who led the group, has been quite visible in Black Lightning from Brandon Thomas. And so this story with DC Power is actually going to lead into another one-shot that's coming out in a few months that looks more at the Power Company as they are attempting to basically undo a lot of the damage that Amanda Waller did with Absolute Power. But this series, again, DC Power is typically a anthology series, and so this case, and it is written by John Jennings, Brandon Thomas, Vita Ayala, and then we get another story from Zipporah Smith, and then we get art from Adigan Ilhan, who, of course, was also doing the art on the Shadow Cabinet over at Milestone, Cannon White, and Kelsey Ramsey. And again, we get we get the main story, and the main story is broken into two parts, at the beginning and at the end. So it's the first story and the last story. It's in two parts. And then we get that, and that story focuses on Josiah, and we learn that his powers are really out of control. And uh, John Henry Irons is basically boom tubing him to really deserted areas. And we see in this issue, he boom tubes him to one of the moons of Mars so that he can discharge this buildup of energy that he has in him. And his powers is out of whack, but he also wants to get the power company back together. And what we see in the middle of this first story and the last story is many stories focusing on those members that will become a part of the team. So we get a story with Vixen and Bolt, Bolt being the character who got the powers of Shazam from Black Adam. And we get a story with uh, Duke Thomas and Batman. And that was a really fun story, especially once I was able to get into it. And I basically, that story was written by Vida Ayala. And upon reading it again, and this is just a brain fart on my part, first things coming out of my mouth is why why are they writing Bruce with this voice? I mean, it's just, and then I realized, doofus, look at the skin tone. That Batman is Jace Fox. And so, again, complete brain fart on my part. You know, once I realized that mistake, I really enjoyed the story. Again, Duke and Jace are hanging out, and Duke helps Jace take down some goons. And in the end, they really talk about, who they are as outsiders and how they carry a weight that other members of the Bat family don't necessarily carry, especially being black. And it was a good story. The weirdest part for me, and I put it in my review that's on the website, was the end of that story where they're playing spades against one another. I don't like playing spades one on one with anyone. I need a team. It needs to be 2-on-2. That's just me. But it was still a great moment, just those two hanging out and not worrying about goons at that point. Just hanging out, eating, and playing spades. So I'm excited to see where that goes. But then there was the final story, and the final story, which was actually the second story. So in order, it was the two parts for Josiah Power at the first and the last spot. Then we get the story of Cyborg and Green Lantern, Joe Mullion. And that was an interesting story simply because it makes me wonder where they could go with this, because it seems like those two just had a connection. And I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, and if it does, fine. And if it doesn't, fine too. But I truly enjoyed all four of those stories. But after getting through the inner stories, looking at the team members that are going to be in this one shot, that's going to be written by Brian Edward Hill, we get to the second part of the Brandon Thomas story, and we learn that Josiah is recruiting Black Lightning to lead the team. And he's basically have asked Amanda Waller's nephew, who escaped in Absolute Power, to help, kind of probe Black Lightning's mind to see if he's up to the task. And we learn that he is, but Black Lightning turns down the offer, despite the fact that he wants to. And he really does it because of what's going on in Black Lightning. If you can remember, if you're reading Black Lightning, and you should, in Black Lightning number 3, he's dealing with a lot of conflict, not only with the family, because remember, Anissa, her powers are out of whack and she's having trouble controlling them because she not only has her powers, but she has someone else's powers as well. And so she's struggling. And in the course of issue number 3, the Justice League, or at least in particular, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, transport her back to the Watchtower into one of those containment cubes that kind of helps control the abilities as they go out of whack. And Black Lightning's in conflict with them now because he feels that he should have been able to help his daughter as a father, and the League, particularly Batman, disagrees with him. And so issue 3 ended with him looking like he's ready to battle out with members of the League, particularly Superman, which was on that last page of issue 3 of Black Lightning. But we see that, Josiah has recruited Black Lightning to lead the team, but because of those events, Jefferson says no. He can't focus on everything that he's been tasked with already, as well as the conflicts that's going on right now with the League and with his family. So he turns down the offer. But the issue ends with, Josiah going over to John Henry because, again, it's time for him to discharge that power that's been building up. And Jefferson sees this. And so as the issue ends, you see this look on Jefferson's face that makes you think that he may end up reconsidering, may end up reconsidering Josiah's offer. Now, you can also cheat as I did and read the solicits to know that he is going to be leading the team in this one shot. But what I ultimately hope is that this one shot will not just be it for the power company. I think with the cast of characters that are involved in this issue, with Jace, with Malik, with Vic, with Joe, with Josiah, with Duke, there's a lot there. And under the leadership of Jefferson Pierce, they could be a really formidable team, especially considering how Black Lightning handled the leadership duties during Batman and the Outsiders. Now, again, I'm a fan of Brian Edward Hill. I'm looking forward to the one shot. But if there ever is a series with the Power Company, I'm really hoping that it's split between Brian and Brandon Thomas. I have been a huge fan of Brandon Thomas since he did Future State back when we were looking at the Outsiders. He did the backup stories for the Outsiders, and I just loved his take on all of the characters. And of course, 2 of the characters that were in those backups are in the Power Company, being Jefferson and being Duke. And he made me a Duke Thomas fan. So I am hoping that we get to see more of that. But again, that is my number 2 book for the week, DC Power, Rise of the Power Company, number 2 from DC Comics. Now, my number 1 book, and I am excited to talk about this, Storm Lifedream number 1. So this is over at Marvel Comics. It is under their Marvel Voices imprint. So again, it's coming out again just in time to kick off Black History Month. This again, Marvel Voices is typically an anthology series. So we have a group of writers. We have John Jennings. We have Angelique Roche, which I do believe is her first time doing actual comic book scripts. She's usually done editorial work on Marvel Voices, but I think this is her first time actually writing a story. But we also have Brittany Smith as well as Curtis Baxter, and then we have art from Edwin Gallman, Alita Martinez, Charles Stewart III, and Karen S. Darbo. Great lineup of creators in this issue. And this was brought together basically to celebrate Storm as a character and who she is as a character. And I absolutely loved it because what we see is this intergalactic group of historians have decided that Storm is worthy enough to be in their archive. And so they have gone throughout the multiverse, downloading the consciousness of all of the Storms. And now they get to 616 and they go to download our Storm, 616's Storm. And what they do is, as they take Storm to download her consciousness, they put an AI construct in her place to impersonate her while she sleeps, but just to make sure that if someone enters, that they don't see that something's wrong. But in the course of this construct decides it wants out. And in this story, and it's done in multiple chapters by the different creators that are doing this, they go and they look at all the different times of Storm throughout her life as a child, as Mohawk Storm, as Goddess Storm. We just get all these renditions of her. But what the story tells is how this AI is using all of these constructs, all of these different versions to learn about 616's Storm, because since that is the body she's in now, that is the way she gets out. And so she is basically manipulating Storm to gather brain patterns that she can use to make her way out of this construct. And after a lot of back and forth and Storm's really challenging herself on a lot of things, a pattern's been confirmed and this AI goes to attack. And yet Storm, being Storm, doesn't give up. She fights back. And we learn that she's also been learning the AI and she figures out a way to take her life back, and she stops the AI from basically taking over. And just a great story. And the story ends with Storm being back in her bed in Atlanta, and she's just sleeping peacefully. And the archivists, they are satisfied that they were able to get all of the constructs, or at least all of the consciousness, downloaded into this archive that they've created for Storm. But the AI is still there. Storm thought she may have destroyed it, but we see that it's still there, and the story ends with a "the end?" question mark, which lends that they could be more to come. But it was a really good story looking at Storm, who is top two of my favorite mutants in the X-Men universe. She's second only to Magneto. But when I look at those two, they can really flip flop in the 1 and 2 spot, because I look at those two have a greater connection with all that they've been through. I appreciate their connection more than I appreciate the connection between Magneto and Charles Xavier. And I am hoping to sit down with Angelique to talk more about Lifedream. Uh, Angelique is a New Orleans native as well. She and I have been in communication about getting together to talk about Lifedream, and I'm hoping to get that done this week. It's been a little hectic here in Louisiana, especially for her, because you may not know this, but last year she served as Queen of Zulu, which is one of our prominent Mardi Gras crews here in Louisiana, in New Orleans. And so she's doing a lot of queen duties right now as she is preparing to turn over her crown to the Queen for 2025. So we're just trying to get schedules together, but I'm hoping that we can get together this week to talk more about Lifedream, because I have a lot of questions about her motivations for this story, as well as what what it felt like for her to be on a different side of the table, as far as being a contributing editor compared to a comic book writer. And so I'm hoping to get some insight from her on that. But it was a great issue. The storytellers, from both the written and the visual standpoint, just did a awesome job. I they The way in which they were able to just draw all of these versions of Storm, and again, it goes back to Storm as a child, Mohawk Storm, which I know is the favorite for some, to Storm in her current rendition, was just great. I'm always been a fan of Edwin Galman. I will very seldom not pick up something that he's not doing, especially with some of the covers that he's been doing lately. I'm just happy to see Storm lifted to where she is right now. And it's kind of been happening for the last few years. If we go back to the Krakoa era, as we've seen her seen, more as a goddess, with her role with Arako, and just how things happened with how the whole Krakoa era came to an end and her role in it. And I'm just happy to see her in this place right now, with her series going on right now, her being a part of the Avengers. Storm is really in a good place within the Marvel comic universe. So I'm hoping to get more of that. And again, I'm hoping to speak with Angelique Roche about that in the coming weeks. But that is my number one book for the week. Storm, Lifedream #1, under the Marvel Voices imprint. All right, before closing out, let's look at my honorable mentions for the week. Those that were really good, but just not good enough to crack into the top. First up, Green Lantern #19 from Jeremy Adams, Eau Claire Albert, and Jason Paz over at DC Comics. This was just a fun story. So it's the first issue of Green Lantern after the Fractured Spectrum one shot that came out last week. Yes, last week or the week before. And it's the last issue, not the last issue of the series, but the last issue of Green Lantern before we get into Green Lantern Corps, which Jeremy Adams is also writing. But Hal is basically putting a team together to head out to the Source Wall, and he has Kyle Rayner, he has Connor Kent, and he has Odyssey, the Time Bandit, who they were able to recruit after escaping from her science cell. And funniest part of it was the interaction between Connor, Kyle, and Odyssey in two different parts of the story. In the middle, when Kyle and Odyssey goes out to find Connor, and they find him as he's out there helping these farmers get some water in their land. There's just that crazy interaction when Connor sees Odyssey for the first time, and he just go googly eyes over it. And then the second part is at the end, after Hal leaves the ship to go and investigate some disturbances that's going on that appears to be the emotional spectrum acting up again. And we see Kyle and Connor fight each other over who gets the captain's chair, and Odyssey is just sitting there with her head on her hand, wondering whether or not things would have been better if she was still in her science cell back on Oa. But that was a really good story. Absolutely, really, really liked it. It just wasn't good enough to crack into the top. But again, that's Green Lantern #19 at DC Comics. Next up, going over to Marvel Comics, we have Moon Knight, Fist of Khonshu #4 from Jed MacKay, with art from Dev Pramanik. I'm hoping I pronounced that last name correctly. But Mark is in a bad place right now. So if you remember in the last issue, police raided the the Midnight Mission, basically took it out. And at the same time as the mission is under attack, Mark is revealing to Tigra that Hank Pym is still alive, and she did not take that news too kindly from Mark. So he's not in a good place right now, and his other selves in Stephen and uh, Jacob are, trying to get him to stop acting up and really get things back together and fight for the Midnight Mission. And while this is happening, he's attacked by Vermin and his clones, and Mark just goes ballistic on them. But in the end, Mark realizes that in order for him to take back what is his, to get the Midnight Mission back, to protect his streets as he's done all this time, he's going to have to go after Achilles Fairchild, the drug dealer that's been putting glitter on the streets and have been addicting people, and anyone who tries to get off basically dies. And so he challenges him to a fight, and that's how the issue ends with Mark putting out the challenge. So we will see how that fight goes with uh, Achilles Fairchild and Moon Knight. But again, that's my other honorable mention, Moon Knight Fist of Khonshu #4 over at Marvel Comics. And then my last book, going back over to DC Comics, we have Superman, the Lex Luthor Special #1, written by Joshua Williamson with art from Eddie Barrows. Clark's worst fear has come to light. We see in House of Brainiac, after Lex and Lena take down that construct that Brainiac had built, and Lex basically sacrifices himself to save Lena. He loses all of his memory, and he becomes a different person, and he's seen differently. Now that they're back in Metropolis, Lena and Mercy are trying to see if there are ways that they can help Lex get some of his memories back, because we know that Lex is a genius, but this current Lex is not that Lex that we all know. He's not the genius Lex. And so they are trying different things, and we see in this issue that Lena brings, or we see that Lena brings him a piano, because she knew from her grandmother, Lex's mom, that he loved playing the piano. And so they attempt to use that to try to see if they can get his memories to come back. Mr. Terrific needs Lex, because he and Lex were working on something that will allow transmissions to occur across the multiverse. And we see, he basically go to Superman and say, hey, is there any way we can get the old Lex back? Because I need him for this machine. It will help determine and help me realize what happened to Darkseid at the end of Absolute Power as we get into All In. And he needs Lex to help him with that. Mr. Terrific does. And Superman is in a conundrum, because he doesn't want the old Lex back. The new Lex doesn't want the old Lex back. The only ones that seem to be working at this is Mercy, who has really gained feelings for Lex, and Lena. And we see through backstories that what Lex created as a kid was basically this emitter that affected Clark as a child. Clark was a baby at the time Lex was a kid, and this emitter produced music, and this music helped calm Clark. But what we see is that, Clark goes to Lex to try to see if there's a way he can remember some of his life. And Lex really pushed back at it. He doesn't want the old Lex to come back. And the story ends with, you know, Lex going back to the piano, and he's playing the same tune that Clark remembers hearing as a child that puts him to sleep. And it is at that point he knows that the old Lex Luthor is back. And so now we really get to see what happens in the pages of Superman as the old Lex Luthor returns. And I'm excited to see what happens, considering all that's been going on and how much development New Lex has had since House of Brainiac. But old Lex is back. We knew that it wasn't meant to last, but I'm gonna miss the guy, and I enjoyed the issue as well. But that was my number 3 honorable mention. My third honorable mention, Superman, the Lex Luthor special, #1 over at DC Comics. All right, finally, before we go, let's look at what's gonna happen next week. So, as I mentioned, I'm hoping to sit down with Angelique Roche to talk about Storm Lifedream. If I'm able to do that, I'll have that interview ready for you all so that we can get some more insight into how Lifedream came together. But from a comic book standpoint, as far as what I'm going to be reading, man, there is a lot out. Again, it's the first of the month, so all of those books that probably could have gone between the last week and this week are now going to be just flooding out. First up, over at DC, I'll be reading Batman #157. It is the last issue of the Chip Zdarsky era. This is the battle between Batman and Commander Star, who we now know is KG Beast. But we see that saga, that era, come to an end. So we'll see how Chip Zdarsky bring that to a close. Then also, Absolute Superman #4 from Jason Aaron with Rafa Sandoval on art. Batgirl #4, my favorite Bat book right now, from Tate Bromble with art from Takeshi Miyazawa. And then Birds of Prey #18 from Kelly Thompson with art from Juan Cabal. We see a new arc beginning now that they've been able to save Cass and they've left Onyx and the other birds on Themyscira. So we get a new arc that will look to be focusing on Oracle. But I'll be picking that up. And then next up, JSA #4 from Jeff Lemire with art from Joey Vasquez. It focuses on Beth Chapel, Dr. Midnight, the new Dr. Midnight. As you can remember, she was captured last issue. And so we see what happens to her in the hands of the Injustice Society. If you've seen the previews, you will know that she goes up against Solomon Grundy and seems to handle him pretty well, but we'll see how things go with the rest of the Injustice Society. Then also at DC Comics, Two-Face #3 from writer Christian Ward with art from Fabio Verez. And then finally over at DC, Shazam #20 from Cena Grace with art from Dan McDade. I have been really looking forward for this one. This is the one shot that I wish wasn't a one shot that would somehow come into continuity, but this is the one shot where John gets struck by the lightning while he's at the Rock of Eternity, and he turns back into his 10-year-old self. So we will see how that plays out again. I'm hoping that it stays that way, but we know that it's not, considering solicits. But if there's not a scene where 10-year-old John shows back up in front of now 14, 15-year-old Damian Wayne, I am going to be disappointed. There has to be an interaction between those two before that issue ends at some point. But I'll be looking forward to that. Then, going on over to Marvel Comics, The Ultimates #9, written by Dennis Camp with art from Chris Allen. We see Power Man come into play, so we will see how that plays out. Also at Marvel, The Avengers, number 23 from Jed McKay with art from Vari Karami. We see the team still in pursuit of Black Cat and Kang the Conqueror. We'll see how that plays out as Felicia seems to have turned on them. Then, then staying at Marvel, we go to Power Man Timeless, number 1, written by Jackson Lanzine and Colin Kelly with art from Bernard Chang. We kind of see, Luke in this new mode where, he is going to be timeless, immortal, more or less. So this is the first issue. I'm going to see what it's about. And hopefully, let's see if it'll crack into the top 3 of my favorite books for the week. Going over to Boom Studios, Grimm number 21 from Stephanie Phillips with art from Flaviano. We will see how things are going. I haven't read. I've just started catching up on Grimm. I got really behind, but over the past few weeks, I've been able to catch up. So now I'm going to be all caught up in reading this new issue over at Boom Studios. And then moving on over to IDW Publishing, there's supposed to be, and I need to check, but there's supposed to be a new Star Trek series, and I'm not sure if it's a one shot or not. Looking at Section 31. Now, if you're watching, if you have Paramount Plus, you know that the movie is out, and the reviews have not been great. So I'm gonna take a look and see if this actually does come out. I'm gonna take a look at it and give it a read. That's also the case over at Massive Publishing with I Lie Popeye number 4 from writer-artist Marcus Williams. That's supposed to be coming out this week as well. And if it does, I'll be taking a look at it. I've really been enjoying that series as well. I love his take on Popeye and the manga style in which he draws him is really, really good. So I'll be taking a look at that if I can confirm that it's actually going to be out this Wednesday as well. And then finally, over at over at Mad Cave Studios, Gotcha Man, Only One Earth number 1 from Tommy Lee Edwards with art from Nuno Plati. And what this looks at, it seems to be in continuity. I'm just not certain of the timeline of this story in comparison with the actual series. But we see, Joe and Ken are on a mission to basically watch over this princess who's now moved into the role of queen, as Galactor really sets a big, huge trap that basically, in the end, will have some dire consequences. But we also see in this that there is some tension between Joe and Ken. And we're gonna see how that plays out in this first issue and in the series as a whole. This is a 4-part series, I believe, and it's supposed to be within the main universe of Gotcha Man. But I am hoping to get Tommy Lee Edwards on the show to talk about it as well. I'm hoping to make that happen pretty soon. But man, there's a lot of books coming out. I'm excited to read them all. Welcome to February. And I will see you guys next week. That is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Ben Comic Book Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of the program. The Comic Ben Podcast, as well as the Comic Book Spot, are a part of the Comic Book Source family of sites and media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter X at comic_Ben, or my personal account at BatmanFan_4life. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. We're all over social media. You can also follow our sister site over at thebatmanuniverse.net for all of your news and reviews in the world of Batman. Tune in next time as we give you more in the world of comic books. Again, we truly appreciate your support. But until we meet again next time, keep reading those comics.